amendment? Because...
Well, you really ought to ask Councillor Collier-Card. But I believe the intent of her amendment is that the $8 million would likely still be reallocated into programs that serve the community, but it would be done by the Police Commission, not through this community framework that we've created, which involves the Police Commission and the City of Calgary working together with the community.
That's right. What do you think is the point of that?
Well, we don't have any visible, and it's going to sound like I'm complaining about it, but this is actually how it should work. Politicians do not actually have access to the line items of the police budget. And so what Councillor Collier-Card is basically arguing is, if the police want to reallocate those funds, they can do it themselves without the city or council getting involved in it. I personally think that when the police came to us on September 10th and suggested that they wanted to work with city administration and the community to do this, that was actually a great step forward. And so Councillor Collier-Card's proposal is, shall we say, better than nothing. But I think it steps back on the progress that was made earlier in the year.
My confusion on that was, I think the word restore is in that.
Oh, I made her take it out because it hasn't actually been taken away.
Yeah.
So now it says maintain, I think.
Because I was confused about whether she was intending to replace the anticipated reduction of growth, or if it was for the reality.
No, so I can help with that. So there are two, and this has been confusing for a lot of people. There are two completely different things on the table. And it's going to be important for us to separate the two because people are getting confused. So the first is that the police, like every department in the city, have frozen their budget at last year's levels, which means that they have to technically give back $10 million of growth. They made it very clear today that under the COVID circumstances, they can't actually use that money in 21. They can't actually hire 60 new officers in 21 because they already have 135-ish vacancies to fill, and their capacity is only 132. They can only train 132 a year. So they can't use the money anyway. So giving them that money would be just it would be a signal, oh, I love the police, but it's really silly budgeting. Why would you give people money that they cannot actually spend, and then they'll come back at the end of the year and say, we have a surplus. And you have to increase taxes to do that. That just makes no sense to me. So we'll deal with that first and see if council has any appetite to do that. But then number two is this question of what the police service and the commission have suggested is that 8 plus 2, coincidentally also $10 million, which is why it's so confusing, but that they will take an additional $8 million out of their base budget and put into this community service framework that they're jointly developing with the city. And they will also take $2 million within their own budget and use it for investigating better ways of responding to mental health calls as well as anti-racism work. And that's their prerogative. That $2 million, you know, it's not really about us. It's their prerogative. So council tomorrow will debate whether to accept their recommendation of taking that $8 million and putting it into this community services framework that's been developed.
Is it fair to say that the amendments that are on the floor kind of fall into two opposing camps in a way?
They do, but the opposing camps are interesting because no one yet is saying that the police shouldn't invest that $8 million. What's on the floor is, should the police do it themselves, or should it be done in conjunction with the city and the community? Now, it may well be tomorrow that some members of council will just say, no, use that $8 million for frontline policing. But here's the thing, we don't actually have the right to tell the police commission that. It's up to them how they want to spend their budget.
If the police commission submission goes ahead and that framework was laid out through Community and Protective Services, how it would work, and you've already addressed the issue of the additional officers, so that growth will not happen. But if that submission goes ahead, what does that mean in terms of the policing that Calgarians can expect? Will that be effective on this?
No, the police chief was pretty clear that that $8 million reallocation will not reduce the number of officers on the street. It will not change how officers work, and his hope and aspiration is that in fact it will make policing better.
So the negative elements that he referred to, like there are positives and there are negatives, the negatives aren't so overwhelming that shouldn't go ahead.
No, and the negatives he was talking about around cop-to-pop ratio, around overall crime increase, I mean, you can have big debates about that. So Vancouver, for example, has a much, much lower cop-to-pop ratio. In other words, they have more police officers per population, but their crime severity index is much higher than Calgary's. So you can have a debate about that, but that was more a conversation about the state of policing. The money that is in their submission is not really directly related to that.
But Councillor Farkas was a bit concerned about the body-worn camera videos, you know, that.
Yeah, no, those were legit questions, but those are like every department in the city. The police are going through this thing that I call a zero-based review, a zero-based budget review, and they are finding ways in which to deliver services differently. And I actually was very satisfied with the chief's answers to the questions about, you know, how is this going to change body-worn cameras? And the answer is it's an administrative thing. It's not going to change how citizens receive their service. And I'm satisfied with that. And that's what we expect all of our departments to do.
I guess like technically, I mean, council is not going to be deciding whether to reallocate some of the police budget. It's just like, because that gets left up to the commission at the end of the day. If they
No, if council agrees with Councillor Carra's amendment, which is to transfer $8 million from the police commission to the community service framework, then that actually does fall under the city's control.
So the debate tomorrow is going to be, should the police decide where the $8 million goes, or should it be you guys, or the police commission and the city decide where it goes?
That's right, that's how I would characterize it. That the debate is, should the police decide where it goes solely, or should the police, the city, and the community decide together?
But it doesn't sound like there's an element amongst council, at least, let's say 8 at a minimum, to just not do this.
Well, I have to repeat, we don't have the right. We can't tell the police how to spend their money, and I hope my colleagues on council are clear on this, which is, if we vote against anything, then the police can spend that $8 million however they wish. They could spend it on body-worn cameras, they could spend it on new helicopters. I suspect, from what the commission has said, and the police's commitment to systemic racism, they're gonna spend it on this anyway. But the question is, do you want some more visibility and some more governance over it?
Councillor Chu asked that question about whether the chief felt he was being pressured. The fact that the chief did indicate, you know, I'm very concerned, or this is going to have a detrimental impact in terms of the service Calgarians get, what does that say to you?
It says it's the right thing to do. You know, we sometimes see leaders and managers in public sector organizations come forward with a budget that they don't really believe in and say, look, I had to do this, but I don't really believe in it. And I didn't really hear that from the chief today. He said, we're very open-eyed about it. It's not utopia. If it was utopia, we would do that and that and that and that. I heard that from the commission chair as well, that the commission very thoughtfully said, you know, this is what makes sense. And certainly when the chief was asked if he was being pressured, he just said, no. And let me put it this way. If you know any police chief, particularly this police chief, yeah, they don't get pressured. That's not how it works. You don't get to be the chief if you're easily pressured. Okay?
Just got a question here for you. So you asked about my trip to Minnesota. We did talk to city council down there about their police department.
Oh, tell me what you learned.
Well, just what they're experiencing. They had a sharp reduction in their staffing because of you know, stress leave, retirements, and things along those lines because of the decisions that they move forward. Obviously, this is a lot different, but how can you guarantee that, or how can you ensure that the police here aren't going to have those same challenges with a little bit less funding, which you guys are discussing?
We're talking about 2.5% of the police's quite large budget. We're talking about stuff that doesn't really impact frontline police officers in any way. But most important, we're doing so in a spirit of working together with the police department, which I think is quite different than you've seen in other places.
So the concerns have been raised by the police association. Do you think, you know, it's going to be a trust but verify situation like that? If this goes ahead, they'll have to go along for the ride and see that any concerns that they have really aren't as bad as what everybody around the table today is saying.
Yeah, I think you answered the question, right? Which is, It's best if we all work through this together. And of course the union has some concerns, but the union has also signed off on a statement acknowledging systemic racism within the police and the need for change. We'll get this right and we'll get it right together.